Flic, great to be speaking with you today. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We've already had a little chat, haven't we? I am lifing. Life is lifing. I'm in it. I am in it. I know that like 24 hours from now things can be different. A week from now things can be different. But I am doing it. Sleeves are rolled up and I'm in. How are
I feel
you?
like it's yeah. Well, I feel like I'm in the same boat, and I don't know what the seasons are like because I know you're based in Canada, and here we've just had the clocks go back, so everything's getting a bit darker earlier. Everything's getting a little bit colder. People are probably becoming a little bit more bristly, so you're kind of getting into that. Life is certainly lifing season, but hopefully with some, like you say, goodness around the corner. But today I wanted to first of all get into your story, who you are and what you're doing now. But let's talk about more importantly who you are as a person and I guess how you've come to be. So I'll leave it to you.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Flic, and I'm a freelance mental health writer, and I've been that for like 6 years now. As you said, I'm in Canada, so I'm a Brit living in Canada. Been here 19 years, which is bonkers. That just flies by. And I'm a mum to two teenage sons who are amazing, and they also keep me on my toes, James. And when I lived in the UK, my background is hospital play therapy. So I worked with children and their families with life-limiting, life-threatening conditions, a little bit of palliative care. I worked at Great Ormond Street Hospital, as well as doing community nursing. And so I've kind of got various angles of working with people. And I would say for the last, 4 years, 3 years, I've been doing a podcast, Everyday Burnout Conversations. And it's a real passion of mine because I went through a real rough burnout. It was not pretty whatsoever. But, it was life changing. And I think there's, you know, from tough times, we all grow, right? Like it's painful at the time, bloody hell. But like when you come out of it, there is a huge amount of growth. And so I'm just kind of, hoping I can share the stories of others to help others because I felt very lost for a while there. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask in terms of what your motivation was to then go and study burnout and make that your focus, but it seems like that maybe have come from kind of personal experience. But actually, just rewinding because I didn't realise that about you, that you came from your background and working at Great Ormond Street. So I'm actually really because that's a really niche profession, and I don't think a lot of people would know about it. So maybe actually we could just explore that for a little bit if that's okay. And actually, what does that entail? And maybe some of the moments out of that part of your career and life that stood out for you in terms of life lessons that you got and some of the, because I can imagine you see the real extremes of life in that environment and what it throws at you, but also I guess there can be some extremely uplifting moments as well.
Yeah, you've nailed it. I mean, it doesn't get more raw than, ill health, sickness, facing mortality. And, if that's your child as well. I worked with the child, but I work within the family unit. Because you're definitely, I would see siblings struggle because there was a whole guilt thing of, why them, not me. But then, they're having this attention and I'm struggling. And it's very complex when just one person in that circle is really struggling with ill health. And so, I loved it. I really loved it, James, because I guess innate within me, it's very much like live for the moment. It's just who I
Mm.
am. It suited my energy and my skill set. It was very much every day you walk in and you kind of, you're just living in the moment because you've got no other choice to. And also, as a kind of a healthcare professional, it's heart wrenching. Some of the things you're seeing and you're having to face, and, just witnessing people in such utter pain, emotionally, physically, you're kind of having to, just show up and do what you can. And I think, there's a lot of people in the NHS struggling right now. And I see that. And I've had old colleagues reach out to me because of the podcast and say, oh, God, we're listening to this because it's so hard at the moment, But I think when you work with children, a lot of my work was play therapy, right? And it's literally kind of exploring and processing your understanding, what's going to happen, what has happened through play. And that is one thing that's really stuck with me. And I think as adults, we often lose is that ability to play, to be lighter, because it's so easy, isn't it? I mean, life is tricky, and sometimes it can really get you down. Um, and and then you kind of get in a loop and a cycle of just being like, I don't know how to get through this. Whereas sometimes I think we just need to escape for an afternoon and just do something very light and playful.
Mm.
Because when we do that, it's telling our nervous system that we're safe and we're okay and we're protected. And I think that goes a long way towards how we then kind of process things and approach things when our nervous system is calm, because our nervous system, James, it's a nightmare. It
Yeah,
really does cause chaos. It's got a purpose, but it causes chaos.
absolutely. And that's something I've explored with people that I've worked with in the past, and actually I've talked about on the podcast, is that our nervous system and our parts of the brain, especially the parts of the brain and the hormones that drive anxiety, are the ones that are there to actually protect us. But sometimes it's difficult for us to, in the moment, understand that. And only in time can we, actually rationalize those thoughts, where we're seeing a threat that's presented, but actually rationalizing, okay, maybe it's not so much of a threat. Maybe it means this. But yeah, I think absolutely. We're talking about adults needing to play. I certainly resonate with that, and giving yourself the opportunity to feel safe so that you're able to express yourself and explore those feelings a little bit more. I have that experience with my sport. I know that a lot of people who play sport do it for exactly that reason, where for just those 90 minutes, 3 days a week, you can be on a pitch and everything else goes away. And all that you're focused on is, oh, I'm going to go catch the ball. Oh, I'm going to go hit that ruck over there. This is a rugby, it's very rugby specific, this example. But for that moment, you feel safe in that environment and you're completely immersed in it. And for me, then I do find that some things that I was thinking about before that were weighing heavy on my mind, that I'm able to make sense of a little bit more. I've calmed down a little bit. I can rationalize, and everything kind of, it gets put into perspective. So that yeah, that's wonderful. And I guess, what were some of the things that were being done? I don't know if you were comfortable sharing this, but some of the types of play that you were kind of instructing the kids, or helping the kids to work through some of
Yeah,
those
I
feelings.
mean, it would range from, kind of pain management, helping them to kind of cope with pain. It would be distraction therapy. So if they're having an invasive procedure, say they're having a cannula fitted, I would even go into like surgery. And if they were having kind of just, they were, awake and they were just having like a local anesthetic, and I would do distraction therapy, because interesting, isn't it? When we talk about this nervous system, I think when we're really triggered, we just want to hide. We just want to protect
Hmm.
ourselves. And a safe nervous system leaves you very open and you're able to connect with other people. So listening to you on the pitch, I was like, yeah, of course he's able to relax. And you're focused on the game. But James, you've also got like a team around you. And although you're not kind of, it's that shoulder to shoulder kind of connection, isn't it? Which is really important. And I think that was important when I was doing my play therapy. I would also prep them if they were having like, an invasive surgery, because I worked with children with oncology, issues and whatever. And so they were having
Hmm.
big surgeries. So we would do a lot of prep work. And as you can imagine, you're in a very clinical environment. And so what was important was to kind of diffuse that wherever possible. And so we would do a lot of like needle play. Like, do you know what I mean? We would get oranges and they would practice, carrying out, playing out what they were experiencing to help them process it. It's kind of, we were trying to help them take away or, reduce some of the fear. And, I'm a big believer, like, laughter is so important. It's so important for our mental health. But that was a huge part of my work, was like, how can I make these kids laugh? Because it was just, how could you kind of bring down that heightened nervous system, and also develop these connections, you know?
Yeah,
That was what
absolutely.
was so important. Yeah.
And I can imagine that that kind of job is extremely demanding on your energy levels, your resolve. Because I'm assuming, because given the amount of energy that I can so clearly see in you, and you can feel it kind of bursting through the screen. But bringing that to work every day and giving yourself to these kids and trying to make them laugh is a very challenging thing. And bringing that consistent energy where you can't really let them see what's going on behind the curtain to your own life, and you kind of trying to be there for them as much as you can. Can you think about times where that was challenged and your energy levels were challenged, and can you ever think about, oh, that was a really tough day, and how you kind of dealt with those moments?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a team, the really good teams are the ones that support each other and are very open and share openly within the team. You build kind of a trust within, your colleagues. And I think there are days where you're like, you're just feeling depleted, and it's heartbreaking. You've worked with a child for 6 months, and then this is the diagnosis, and there's nothing that can be. It's bloody heartbreaking. And it's interesting, James, like, because there is a school of thought where it's kind of, be very kind of, I'm trying to think of the word for being like really stiff upper lip, but it's that case, like, don't show your emotion, be the strong one, be professional. Whereas that is not my personality. And it's interesting. I can remember watching an interview with Rob Delaney. He's the comic and actor in London, and he lost his son Henry to brain tumor. And I can remember him talking in an interview and saying, when they got his son's like palliative care diagnosis, and he told the nurse that was doing respite care, like he was having care at home, that nurse screamed and was like, oh my God, no. And I can remember him saying, that was all I needed right there in that moment. It was so lovely to have someone else feel as shit as I did, like to just feel that pain as much as I did. And so when I heard that, I thought, oh yeah, that was me, because I was in it and I was there and I was with them for the long haul. And there's an element of, you don't, yeah, you have your life, but it's that kind of profession. It's integrated within you. It's not a
Yeah,
paycheck. It's not. It's who you are, and it's what you bring to the world, which is why. Oh my God! Like, I loved it. I treasured it. It was a huge privilege to go and spend time with those children. And it's funny, like, this is what, 20 years ago? I still remember all the kids' names, James. I still do. Like,
wow.
do you know what I mean? And I'm still friends with some of their parents on Facebook. Maybe someone would go, I don't know, you didn't really have much boundary down there. Maybe someone like Rob Delaney would be like, well, thank God there was a Flic. I actually needed that. So it's interesting. Different people need different things, don't they?
Yeah, and I think it's about how you want to leave your mark, and also you've got to adopt your own style. And if being true to yourself means being that way with your kids and the patients and their parents, then you shouldn't try and fight that. I think you use those kind of things to your advantage, rather than, like you say, the classic British mentality of stiff upper lip and don't let them see what you're truly feeling. And I
Yeah.
think that kind of follows the theme around what we're trying to do with this podcast: is being open, being vulnerable
Yeah.
is definitely beneficial. And I'm sure that you would have experienced it, brought you infinitely closer to them than if you were kind of to keep them at arm's reach, and as soon as the session was done, it's like, okay, well, on to the next thing, or you've kind of mentally checked out.
Absolutely. When you were talking, I was like, this is exactly what you're doing, James, with this podcast. I mean, I've spoken to you before, haven't I? And gone, oh my God,
Hmm.
I just love what you're doing. And you are so good at it. You're brilliant at holding space for people, but as well as you're really good at reflecting and mirroring back what they're saying. But it's so important that we, you know, people like you have these podcasts because, when we share our stories, in a safe space where we feel heard, where we feel respected, where we feel someone's actually showing up, not for the paycheck, not for the metrics, not for the Instagram followers, but they're actually like, hey, I want to hear your story, or I want to be here for you. It's just this outpouring, isn't it? It's like this heart chakra opening. Okay, this is what human life is all about. And we are all going to have really dodgy days. And we are going to have days where we just cry all day. We're also going to have days where we're like, oh, that was great. And I really connected with that person and I'm doing all right. So,
Yeah.
then they're kind of two sides of the same coin, I reckon.
100%. And for that glowing reference, I want to make sure that all the listeners know the check is in the post, because I, but in all seriousness, I really appreciate your words, and I think they certainly ring true and will ring true to a lot of people. But yeah, I wanted to actually, I didn't expect us to go down that tangent. That was not on my list of things to talk about. So that's fantastic. So obviously you have a strong sense of altruism from your past and in your career, and what you've chosen to do now, which is to study burnout and choose that as your focus. You mentioned briefly before that you had your own experience with burnout, but would you say that that was the motivation that kind of spurred you on to really delve into it a little bit deeper, and then kind of broaden your reach when it
Yeah,
comes to understanding it?
absolutely. I mean, the story is, James, I was a freelance writer for a mental health app, okay, here in Canada. And I was just so focused. It was a startup. I was on a mission. I was giving it my all. And I've got these two teen boys, and it's life and it's busy and it's whatever. And within over the period of kind of a year, I just started to stop. I began to stop listening to my needs. And I think this is what happens in burnout. One day it's raining. It's like a little bit of a few drops of rain. And then it rains a little heavier. And then, but before you know it, you turn around and you're like, oh my God, there's like a huge big flood in my back garden. Like, how did that happen?
Mm.
And this is what happens with burnout, because when you think of, how stress impacts us, okay? So like with stress, it's very linked to a certain situation or something that's happening in your life at that point, and your nervous system reacts. You're on high alert and you're being called to address it, right? And you're going to have all these different physical and emotional mental symptoms with stress. The thing with burnout is it creeps in. I've said it
Mm.
creeps in through the back door and you don't even know it. And then it literally, before you know, you turn around and you're like, I'm an absolute shell of who I am. And that was a big shock for people when I admitted it, because they're like, well, Flic's always like smiling, life and soul at the party, happy and whatever. And I was just like lying. And I flat down, and I couldn't get out of bed for 3 weeks. I was just
Wow.
so depleted. And I think what happens is you start to lose elements of yourself. So, you start to no longer care. Physically, you're not meeting your needs. I can remember, how you have on your smartwatch, like it measures like your sleep and your pulse rate and whatever. I never paid attention to it, James, ever. But I had to swap over watches with my son, and we were looking at the data, and I could not believe it. I think it said between like September 2019 to December 2019, just that last quarter, my average sleep was 3 hours and 46 minutes. And
Oh wow.
I was so shocked. I was like, what? Oh, it's got to be wrong. But then I look back and I'm like, yeah, no, it was. That's what I did. Because I was just constantly on high alert. My nervous system was so high. And so I held a lot of shame about burning out, right? Because I was like, oh my God, I'm a mental health writer. I wrote the article when the World Health Organization first declared burnout. And I was just like, I was just so ashamed because I thought, how did I burn out? Like, and a lot of my worth was tied up in productivity, right? And meeting the needs of others. So for me to kind of be lying flat on the floor, I was just like, oh, I was just so mortified. But when I was looking for the stories of others, I couldn't find them. I could find all the white papers, all the research, all the data and study, but that wasn't the kind of healing balm I needed. And I didn't want the clickbait, even though I wrote some of those articles. I didn't want any of the 5 top tips to get over it because I was just like flat
Yeah.
on the floor. I really, really craved the stories of others just so I didn't feel so alone. And I couldn't find them. And I think as soon as I started to feel a little bit better, I was like, oh, I've got to share these stories because there's going to be people out there struggling and feeling the same as me. And this is why it's so amazing when I get like DMs or emails from people and they're like, I've just binge listened to 10 episodes over the weekend. I'm like, oh, I get so excited. But I'm like, yes, that's what I would have done. We need to kind of share those stories, don't we?
Yeah, and I think that will strike a chord. I think when you finally resonate, how fulfilling is it when you finally feel like, oh yeah, this is kind of getting some results, and people are there are people out there that are the same as me. But I think you as a mental health writer, we talked a little bit before we started recording about how when you're involved in something that is altruistic, where you're trying to look after the care of others,
Mm,
you can often be so focused on understanding it, spreading the information, because at the end of the day, we want to make this information readily available so that
yeah.
people can understand it and then live their best possible life. But
Mm,
even in that environment, there is still the possibility to be so immersed and completely involved in this topic and these topics around mental health that you then put yourself on the back burner and letting some of these behaviors creep in, that over time, like you said, the raindrop turns into a little bit more of a trickle, and then all of a sudden there's a flood around you.
yeah.
So I think that would definitely resonate with a lot of people. And then one thing you mentioned about the wearables as well, the devices. I think actually on their own, the data and the things that they provide can sometimes be relatively useless when you're not putting these things into action. And I've got a Whoop at the minute now. For me, it's really good around my recovery and making sure that I'm right for the weekend when I'm playing rugby, and I managed to tailor a plan around that during the week. But today I had my longest sleep since I've been wearing a wearable, and it said that on my app in the morning. I went, oh wow! And to be honest, it wasn't. I mean, it was I think a 9 hour sleep because I went to bed early. I was fairly knackered from yesterday.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, yeah, I haven't really been sleeping that much. And sometimes this data, when you take into the context of what's happening in your life, can provide some real value as well. So I thought that was another interesting point you raised. But kind of just rewinding a little bit, because a lot of people in the sphere around mental health and people that take an active interest may be more familiar with the term of burnout. But actually, a lot of people may have seen it in a headline or seen it in an article once, or heard their colleague at work talk about burnout, but actually not really know what it is. So how do we define burnout? Like what is it, and how do we understand it a little bit better?
Yeah. Now, first off, I do want to say, because a lot of the articles, a lot of the negative press out there will be like it's a modern, affliction, and people are just kind of they can't get themselves together, whatever, which drives me nuts because I can remember reading a brilliant article in the New Yorker, who and this writer had like traced burnout back to like biblical times. Like, do you know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, because we're human, right? This is what's going to happen. But it was 1975 that a psychiatrist, Herbert Freudenberger, he coined the term burnout, and it was for emotional exhaustion Depersonalization, where you just don't feel yourself, you can't relate to anything, that you stop caring about yourself, caring about things you liked or whatever. And then a decreased sense of accomplishment, where you just don't give a shit anymore, because you can't, because there's nothing
Hmm.
left. So I think it's very interesting. I mean, I think it's basically a big energy and health crisis. I kind of see it as you're bankrupt. You're bankrupt of all your energy. And I'm talking like emotional and physical and spiritual energy too. Like there's nothing left there. It's all gone. It's all been spent. And usually people who burn out, they are the overgivers, the overachievers, the overcare. Like they just give, right? And there's just nothing left. So it's a huge shock for them when their identity has been paired with giving and then there's nothing left. So I think there's a real grief component to it. But for someone who's burning out, like I'll list some of the symptoms, right? Um, Obviously, you're going to have physical exhaustion, but things that you're not going to think of is like that gastrointestinal pain, like you're going to have a really upset stomach, and headaches, high blood pressure. You get sick very often. Your immune system's not there, and you're picking up everything going. Your sleep issues. I didn't sleep, clearly. That happens. It creeps in. Your appetite changes. Maybe you are someone who comfort eats. Maybe you're someone who doesn't eat. That's going to change. And then you're going to have concentration issues as well. And you make mistakes because you're tired. There's nothing
Hmm.
left. And so you make small mistakes, which are devastating to someone burning out, because they often are perfectionist. And so you're like, no, how's this happened? And then it's those feelings of worthlessness, like you just feel worthless. What is interesting for people in the caring profession, a big sign of burnout is when they lose their sense of compassion, because that is so innate within them. The minute they're like, oh, whatever, that's a big telltale. That's a big red flag, because that's not normally where they go. So that's an interesting one. And obviously, you're just very tearful. Your whole body is just breaking down and trying to give you these signs to stop, because you're just so used to going on that hamster wheel and going at like such a pace that, your body, your nervous system is doing its job. It's trying to slow you down. It's trying to make you listen to your body. And what I love about you, when you were like, oh, I actually slept really well, and like you've been going through a lot this week, I'm like, oh, well done. Because your body is actually saying you need to sleep. And instead of being like, what's wrong with me? I'm going to have 2 coffees and I'm going to push through and I'm going to do this work and you actually going, oh, actually, I need to sleep. So that's amazing. But it's these little things. It's where you just do not pay attention to your needs, that you're opening the back door to burnout.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the dangers of modern day living, and we'll go on to a little bit around how we truly recognise some of these symptoms, and then how we can potentially act on them when we understand these symptoms and how they present themselves, and then and how we can kind of move through burnout, and how we respond to burnout. But I think that burnout is a real danger, um, to ourselves with this modern day living, where our attention is being constantly pulled on.
Yeah.
We are demanding more of ourselves every single year on year. It just feels like either companies or individuals or society demands more and more and more, because we're a culture and a society that is just obsessed with growth. And do you know what? There is only so much of yourself that you can give before eventually there's nothing left. And so you said that some of the symptoms are you start to feel less yourself, because there's nothing left for you to give of yourself to other people, to objects, to things, to tasks, all of this kind of stuff. And I think actually we in society at the minute, and especially I can kind of only speak to the UK where I live at the moment, we are running a real risk of increasing our chances and levels of burnout, because of the way that we go on our day-to-day lives. I see it all the time, especially working in a sales profession where you are so much determined by the number. And when you're determined by the number, if it's not there, you're going to do everything in your power and within the hours that you have in the day to hit the number. And sometimes that may leak into unhealthy habits, like working way past the hours in which you're working. It may lead to destructive dietary and nutrition habits, and it may lead to loss of connection, which we know is vital to supplementing our and nourishing our social connectivity part of our brain and our soul, really. So, when you have a look and when you take a little step back more holistically as to some of the biggest threats that we have at the moment, and you know, where do you see some of the biggest threats? Whether that be kind of our pull on social media and how involved we are in that world, whether it be the way that we work. Where do you see some of the biggest threats, and maybe some of the stories that you've heard on your podcast and how they're portrayed?
Really do think the biggest threat is we're just not encouraged to listen to ourselves. I think we, as a society, we need to start with our kids. Because if you think at school, we weren't taught anything about our nervous system really outside of biology. It was biology, and you're just kind of doing your homework and you're getting on with it. You're not cluing into, okay, how I need to look after myself. How will I respond to certain situations? How can I support myself? We're not taught to regulate our nervous system. We're not taught to look and acknowledge our emotions. I think, there's no other way to say it. Like, this is where the patriarchy fucks us all, isn't it? Because if you think of, women and those feminine energies, it's we're just so conditioned to give and provide and nurture and give and give and give and give that we're almost not encouraged or taught to kind of communicate and say, hey, I need help with this. When you think of men and those masculine energies, it's just like give productivity, what you're providing. You're not thinking about your emotions, how you feel. It's just give, give, give. And this is where we're all screwed, aren't we? And I think it's certainly, as mum of two boys, like I think it's so important that we honor ourselves and we listen to ourselves. Like, our bodies are incredible at kind of giving us these signs and symptoms to pay attention. It's interesting, when I spoke to my GP, because I had to stop because I was having heart attack symptoms. Like, so I had completely ignored myself to the point that I thought I was having a heart attack. And then when I spoke to my doctor, she was like, Flic, okay, are you going to stop now? Because I had been going to see her. And she was like, okay, well, this is very great. It's great what you're doing, but let's think about this. And she was like, right, you've just got to stop now, haven't you? I was like, yeah, I think I have. But what was interesting is that she is having people go in and they're saying, kind of presenting with anxiety and depression. And a lot of GPs, like, they're so overwhelmed, like they're trying to
Mm.
manage and help people wherever they can. But no one is able to stop and look at what's underneath that. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
why am
So we're not.
I this way? Why did
Yeah. So we're not
I
going
burn?
to the root cause.
Yeah, like, why did I burn out? Never did I think it would lead me down the road to go, oh, would you look at that? I'm a people pleaser. I overachieve because I have no self worth. I had no self love. I just had nothing. I was completely like, I was just there to help others. Now, in my past life and play therapy, I loved it. I got an energy exchange from that. It was great. I felt I was doing something worthwhile. You have to have that reciprocity. When I started working for a high tech, an app with people with egos at the boardroom table, there's no reciprocity. No one cares. But I'm there at 3 in the morning delivering, you know, some kind of white paper that they can go in to a company with. It's interesting, isn't it, where we just really lose ourselves. And that's where the patriarchy doesn't help us. I think we have to completely change the way we approach our life now. And I do see glimmers of hope. I really do. In the past,
Mm.
5 years, I'm really starting to see glimmers of hope. We have a long way to go, but
So, in terms of just rewinding, what your advice from your GP when you were having that conversation, she said, stop. I'm interested to understand what she meant a little bit more about that. And I think for me, what some of the things you described and where burnout is appearing, whether that be in schools, in companies, in social circles, I think what it comes down to a lot is actually drawing more healthy boundaries with what
yes.
we deem as is acceptable to us. Because at the end of the day, we're never going to be able to control things in our surrounding and things that other people's mindsets, cultures of companies, just on our own. We're never going to be able to change the health system in the UK and what they're able to provide or what they're incentivized to provide. We're not necessarily going to be able to change, unfortunately, school agendas, although I'd love to see that change in time so we can enable children and teens to be able to recognize their emotions and feelings early enough so that burnout becomes less of a problem when they're older. But I think actually being able to understand what healthier boundaries look like for us so that we can stop, like your GP was saying, maybe engaging in some of these more unhealthy behaviors and start prioritizing ourselves in areas which it's healthy and safe to do so, whilst also still being able to achieve all the things that we want to do. But I think until we actually have that check in on ourselves and really actually look back and go, whoa, okay, how am I feeling? Like this part of my life is driving anxiety. I'm, maybe my heart rate's up. What are the kind of things that are contributing towards that? And then how can I respond to that in the best way that serves me? But also, I'm still going to be able to go out and achieve all the things that I want to, rather than the demanded of me. If that makes
And
sense.
that's that self-love piece, isn't it? That's that, I love myself so much that I am going to draw those boundaries in the sand. I am going to do what I can to look after myself, because it's so easy, isn't it? I can remember working 7 days a week, absolutely, because I just felt I couldn't keep up with all of the demands, and I just wanted to get all of this done. And when I look back, where was I? If I'd loved myself, if I'd had some kind of self-worth, that I knew intuitively, I knew this was wrong. I absolutely knew it was wrong. And you talk about my GP, like I'd been to see her a few times because, like, physically I was changing, so my period stopped and I was like, oh, okay, so I must be perimenopause. Or I was always diagnosing myself, James, and I was like, okay, so that's why I can't sleep, that's why I'm struggling, that's why I've got the brain fog, it's the perimenopause. And they'll go, oh, okay, I think I've got depression. It's because of this, and this, and I'm having these nightmares, and I'm starting to have this kind of look at these things in my child. It's depression. And so I was always diagnosing myself. I was going in, presenting her with the problem, having already researched it, because that's just who I am. But I didn't even give myself the grace to be nurtured and looked after. I was so used to looking after myself. I was so used to having to sort everything out for my family, sorting all the problems out. I was so used to trying to, run 10 steps ahead, so we don't even have any issues. I didn't even allow myself to be looked after. If, like,
Mm.
it's interesting just talking to you now, and I'm processing this in real time. If I'd gone to my GP like a year before and gone, okay, there's this, and this, I don't know, what do you reckon? There's probably a chance you would have said, oh, Flic, I think you're doing too much.
Yeah,
Boundaries.
but yeah, and I think I was going to mention. You said that you recognize that intuitively
Mm,
that something is wrong.
yeah.
But I think due to the demands that we put on ourselves and others place on us, I think actually sometimes it can be so difficult to listen to our intuition and really trust our gut. And I think there comes shame into it because of how burnout has been stigmatized. Because I'm sure you would have heard this a million times before, but with burnout, I know that maybe older generations will say, "Oh, that's just stress. You need to just just chill out.
Yeah.
And oh god, we know how easy that is to do. Not,
Yeah.
but so many of these symptoms that you mentioned can be attributed to other things, and so I think our egos and our, you know, I guess our minds are trying to challenge that fact because we want to keep pushing forward as best as we can. So I think sometimes our egos and our brains get in the way of listening to our intuition and that gut feeling because of all these external demands and pressures that are put on us. But actually, when we take time, and I think that's what, I've come to realize, taking time to sit with yourself and really try and understand that intuition, which I think is so rare to do, and so rarely do we actually make time to do in our day-to-day lives. That's where the real goodness comes out, because when you actually just sit with no distractions and allow yourself that time, you go, wow, okay, like I'm starting to realize some things, and then maybe that would have led for you to present some of those symptoms a bit earlier had you just maybe given yourself the time.
Absolutely. And, I put my hand up and say this was my dream job at this point. The thought of being able to write all this content. I was doing the app copy, I was doing the email list copy, I was doing, the brochures. I felt like, oh, I can really help some people here. I never sat down, just went, oh, let's just see what I can come up with. It was always like a real labor of love, and I put energy into it. And the data was showing that. So again, I got that feedback that, yeah, I'm doing a good job and I'm helping people. It was my dream. And this is what's interesting. When I talk to people, I can remember talking to a lovely doctor in California, and he was saying he burnt out twice. And it's because he just, he was doing his dream. He was running a pain management unit and he was just so happy. But you can still burn out doing something that you love because you're neglecting those basic needs, and as you say, if you just hit the pause button and you sit with yourself, which we're not used to doing, are we? Like, I'm hoping my son's generations, they're starting to do it, but we're just not used to sitting with ourselves and going, is this my dream now? Because I would have been like, oh yeah, no. No, let's move on. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm a big believer everything happens for a reason. I burnt out, I'm doing this podcast, it's all part of my journey, so there's no regrets there. But you've nailed it. Like, we are not sitting with ourselves, we're not feeling the feel, like we're not kind of tuning into ourselves, are we?
Mm, I
um
think so. I think it's a really difficult skill to teach as to how you do that. And I think it's a practice and a skill that needs to be honed over loads and loads of repetition, and we need to commit to ourselves in doing that, because not just recognizing burnout, but there are just so many wonderful implications that I won't even be able to go onto in this podcast because we don't have enough time.
yeah.
But yeah, I think really learning how to listen to ourselves, and I know that our mutual friend Nick, who's on the first episode, is a huge proponent to that. So shout out Nick. He is the daddy of self love.
Oh my
But
god, he's amazing. Social media focus.
yeah,
Complete all
both.
of them.
So I think if we can think about then, right, so we understand, or maybe at least know some of the symptoms of burnout and can kind of describe what it is, and then we kind of recognize that some of them might be appearing in ourselves, but we're not necessarily sure of some of the key trigger points at which we should be thinking to ourselves, okay, this might be burnout, and this is the trigger that I need to take some action. So do you have any examples that you may be able to give, or even just um, at what point should we be checking ourselves and going, yes, this might be burnout?
Yeah. I mean, I think, hit the pause button and really sit with yourself, because beyond the exhaustion, beyond the physical symptoms, listen to yourself, because when you think, it all comes back to our nervous system. And remember, our nervous system, it's an outdated hardwiring system. It was there to protect us from saber-toothed tigers, but it hasn't really changed much, so it doesn't know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and the second email of the day from your boss. It doesn't. They're both like, ah, they both make you squeeze. You know, you're just like, no. So, you know, it's paying attention to that nervous system. And I think, you know, when you think of our sympathetic nervous system, that's going to be the fight, the flight, the freeze, and the fawn. People don't think of the fawn. Like, you know, fawning is people pleasing. It's just doing whatever you can to survive, like just to stay safe. That is another stress response. And so if your nervous system is constantly heightened, because, you know, that nervous system, that flood of cortisol and the adrenaline that is just there to make you move and get out of the way from the saber-toothed tiger, it's not there to run 24 hours a day. And when it's running 24 hours a day, your parasympathetic nervous system is not able to kick in and go, okay, now it's safe for you to sleep, rest, and heal, when that's not in action either. I think you feel it. You physically feel it. You're at that point where physically you know this is awful. I can't go on. I don't like this. I don't feel safe in my own body. I don't feel safe with my circle around me. Like that's when you're like, you have to take action. It's just
Yeah.
because, you know, you will just burn into the ground. I did it. I'm not proud of it. I did it because I just ignored everything. But it's that case of, you know, listen to yourself. That nervous system is key because that nervous system is going to be responsible for the brain fog. It's going to be responsible for the palpitations. It's going to be responsible for you not sleeping. You know, it's all those things, like really pay attention to those.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will who are not experienced with understanding their body, their feelings, what the central nervous system, how it presents, and things like that. So maybe with some of these symptoms that you previously described, whether they be the upset stomach, the headaches, the complete lack of loss of personality, or the things that you really enjoy, feeling down, mood swings, all those kind of things. After we've felt the symptoms, we've recognised something may be wrong, and we want to do the work to understand those things a little bit more. What help can people ask for in terms of what's out there, and how to help them understand it a little bit further? And what kind of practices can we,
Mm.
lean into that are going to help us to understand more about our burnout and try and move past it?
Yeah, I mean, depending on how far down the road you are, because you know there's a spectrum to this, isn't there? I mean, some people really can, if they're catching this early, they really can just kind of, you know, hit the pause button, you know, set things up in their circle and be like, I'm not doing the school pickup. I am not doing this anymore. I'm not, like, give me a, like, when you've got a circle who want to support you, it's brilliant. And you can advocate for yourself, right? And you can say, actually, these are the boundaries. I need to, like, literally hide for, you know, a few days and just kind of recover. That's brilliant. If you've really worked yourself into the ground like I did, then that's where I really benefited from I really benefited from having an outside perspective. So, like for the first 6 months, I had to quit work, right? And so I had to, you know, after my initial lying in bed for 3 weeks, eating Maltesers, watching This Country. I love Dave Ray Cooper. After that, I was like, okay, right, let's try and recover. You know what's really interesting, James, is that I was like, my way to recover, because I was so fearful of kind of losing my footing in my field, was to read a ton. I was almost reading like a book every 2 days, but
Well,
without going, oh, you're still using the same energy that you burnt out with. I was almost overachieving my recovery. So this is where great, isn't it, to have someone like Nick and Jess, have a coach, have someone who is able to mirror back what's happening and help you really look at what's going on, because that for me was the biggest piece of work in recovering from burnout, was to peel back the layers of an onion and go, okay, what's behind my people pleasing? What's behind, the self-worth and the self, like, to really peel back. I think when you have someone to kind of coach you and help you reflect, the most valuable thing about that is that they're going to help you adapt a really gentle, loving, kind voice towards yourself. Because a
Hmm.
lot of people who burn out, they're really hard on themselves and they have a really horrible, harsh self inner critic. And that voice was never theirs. That voice is often from when they were younger, a teacher, a parent, whatever. Do you know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
never their voice, but it's so ingrained in them, they don't even know it's there. And it's just that, they're just constantly being harsh on themselves. When you sit with a coach who knows burnout, who can appreciate what you've been through, they're the ones that are able to gently nudge you and remind you to slow down, use that loving voice towards yourself. And you kind of need that because your tunnel vision, you'll do what I did. You'll just try and overachieve your recovery, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a paradoxical, isn't it? Where I think until you get sometimes an external reality check, it might be the thing that you need to put the brakes on some of those repetitive behaviours. But if I may kind of just summarise a little bit of what you said, so I think for me, building up a strong circle around you is really important. I think in order to do that, we must lean into being vulnerable and really expose a bit, taking the bravery to expose some of the most vulnerable bits of ourselves to those around us and those that we trust. We
Yeah.
should do that with people that we trust, so that we have that understanding, and that when the time comes, we can then rely on them. And I think that's really important. You also mentioned about taking things off our plate, things like not doing the school run, and I think also I've maybe fallen foul of this as well. When I felt really stretched, I've instead of taking things off my plate, I've often added things on my plate, but there'll be things that I enjoy doing, but it just makes my life more busy. So I am then becoming a jack of all trades, master of none, and then again spreading myself thin and just moving the problem from one area to another. So I think it's actually really important to understand what can I afford to take off my plate, what can I afford to delay, what kind of tasks can I just eradicate entirely, and really just focus on, okay, what have I got energy for right now, and what is the most important thing for me to achieve. But actually everything else can wait, because at the end of the day, there is nothing more important than me, and making sure that I'm doing myself a service. I know that might sound to some people as quite self-serving, because we never like to think of ourselves as selfish and thinking, oh, it's all about me, me, me. It really isn't. But at the end of the day, when you're living your own human experience, the only person that you should be doing a service is yourself, and we can only show up for others once we've looked after ourselves first. So I think that's the first port of call, is making sure that we're doing ourselves a service, making sure our workload is manageable, building up a great support network around us. And then, like you said, if it gets to more extreme cases of where we are feeling like we're maybe struggling over a persistent period of time, it's maybe then looking at external help, bringing someone in. You may want to visit a doctor. I know that it's extremely privileged position to have someone like a coach, or someone who's a therapist, and things like that. But there are resources, tools, and things out there, should you go looking for them, that can helpfully push us in the right direction.
Absolutely. And when you hear, there's something about hearing your experience in the voice of someone else. That is also another way to kind of go, oh, it helps. It kind of integrates in your body a bit differently. So when you listen to podcasts like yours, podcasts like mine, you just pick up on maybe something they did, and you're like, it completely changes the landscape, doesn't it? It really
Hmm.
does. And it helps you kind of go, oh, okay, because it gives you that permission piece to look after yourself. I work with someone, Debbie Edwards. She's brilliant. She's a big self-love advocate. And she says, a good little anchor point is like, how can I love myself more right now? What can I do to love myself write more. And it's a great play on words because it's kind of telling your brain that, well, you already love yourself. So how can you build upon that? And I think, that's when you're kind of like, oh, well, maybe I don't need to go and do a grocery shop. Maybe I do need to just sit and do some meditation. Maybe I need to just stare out the window. Maybe I need to do a breath work. Maybe I need to, I just need to go and lie on the sofa with my partner because I need that closeness. I need to feel safe. I need that intimacy. That's also so important for your nervous system. So I
Huge.
think, as you say, there's resources, whether it's listening to a podcast, whether it's reading a book, whether it's connecting with a coach, there's ways to, we're looking for those steps forward. And to me, it doesn't matter how big they are, as long as they're forward and as long as they are within the parameters of being really self-loving and really gentle on yourself and showing that compassion to yourself, because people who burn out, they don't tend to be very compassionate to themselves. They
Yeah,
don't even consider themselves.
I think you see it time and time again. And I have come from I guess, a community, especially in rugby, but also with men who will hear some of these words. And I know they're going to be the people who are listening to this podcast who have heard repeatedly the phrases like self love and compassion and, looking after yourself and treat yourself with sympathy, and almost dismissing that because those words are a little bit fluffy. But hopefully, what we've done in this podcast is, I guess, made the point that some of these things don't need to be going on a mountain and finding inner peace, or going and doing 6 months of therapy, or it's really about listening to yourself a little bit more, taking really simple, actionable things that can help mitigate some of those feelings of being overwhelmed, some of those physical symptoms that you feel. And like I said, going for a walk, giving yourself the chance to be bored and not stimulated by something. Because when we're bored, actually, some of those moments are the best moments that we can be creative and actually just let your mind express itself without having this overstimulation. And that, I'd love to be one of the key takeaways for anyone that's listening to this who may have approached this world from a foreign angle and gone, oh, you know what, it's pretty overwhelming. I'm not too sure about the jargon that they've used. It doesn't need to be super complicated. It
No.
actually comes just down to trying to listen to yourself and be the most compassionate person, because everyone's deserving of it. Every single person is deserving, at least for themselves, to be compassionate to you, to your own self. And hopefully once we're able to do that, then the next steps of realization and kind of self-understanding come later. And that's when we can build up that real emotional agility. Then whatever life throws at us, if we understand our emotions just that little bit more, we've got a better and more healthy response to that.
Oh my God, James, I bloody love this chat. This is so good because I'm listening to you talk. I love listening to you talk, right? And I'm thinking, oh my God, we've come full circle, because actually it all comes down to being more playful. Like, if you think of us as our younger selves, would I say to that little Flic, like, come on, write this, do this, move on, you're not good enough, you've done that wrong? No, you'd be like, oh love, you need a nap, have a nap. Do you know what I mean? You would want to nurture a little kid. You wouldn't want to bully them or pressurize them or make them work harder, make them feel worthless. You wouldn't. And so we've come full circle. Even if, absolutely, if you're like, oh, hang on a minute, what's the jargon going on here? And it's all high level. Like, no, just bring it right back down to being, you're looking after yourself on a very basic level, as if you were a little kid. Show yourself love as if you were a little kid, and you're there.
I love it. I think this conversation will hopefully be great for anyone who wanted an understanding of what burnout is. I think you've really helped me to understand more about what it is, how it presents, how we can recognize it, how we can mitigate it. I think that it's been fantastic. I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I've absolutely loved this conversation. I didn't expect us to go down the rabbit hole that we did at the start, but I'm so happy that we did because, like you said, it came full circle.
It did.
But truly, you know, you are you're fantastic, and I really hope that we get to talk again because the energy that I feel coming across the screen. Unfortunately, I'd love to be face to face one day,
I
but
know. I need to go back home.
but thank you so much for giving us all your time, breaking down burnout for us, and really exploring that with us. Hopefully that will be really impactful for someone out there and will resonate, I'm sure, with a lot of people. Flic, I'd love to give you this opportunity to talk about kind of what's next in your life, but also please do share the details of your podcast as well if anyone wants to listen to more of what you have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So my podcast, Everyday Burnout Conversations, usual places, Apple, Google, Spotify, just type it in. There's 5 seasons, 51 episodes of it.
Wow.
It's been brilliant, really good quality, like nitty gritty conversations. And so you can find that. You can find more of my work, or if you need to reach out or ask me anything, you can find me at flictaylor.com. As for next steps, I'm going to take a little break from the podcast and I'm writing my book.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm getting on with it, and I've put this off for a really long time, James. But I've got enough lovely people in my circle that are like, love, come on, get on with it. So I'm writing my book and making some big shifts in my life because this work, it's almost like half time at a football game, right? You go in, I literally feel like it's been my half time and I've gone into the dressing room and I'm like, okay, this work, that doesn't, they work, they don't. And I'm starting to look at stuff and I'm now kind of going, right, I'm lucky. I've got this life and I've got this health. I'm running with it now and I'm changing things. So more writing. I'm sure you'll still see me around doing bits and pieces. But I want to say, I mean, it's just so important that you have these incredible conversations, James, because we will never know. The ripple effect is huge, and we will never know the person that this is going to absolutely change their life. And I love that. I really love that. But it's amazing what you're doing, and you're just kind of, it takes a lot to do a podcast, and it's a unique skill to hold space for someone and to chat and to kind of have this ease. Like, people will be listening to this and you're making it sound really easy, but I know this is like a incredible skill set. So I'm excited to see what you're going to do next. I want to hear more of these conversations, but I think good things are coming to you.
I hope so, and we'll certainly keep trying. And I've got lots of lovely guests lined up, so very excited about that. I will share all the links of everything that you've talked about in the description to this podcast, and we'll make sure to share it on social media and things. And actually, I've just had an idea of how we could potentially bring you back on with others to promote your book later on when that's ready. So I'm going to leave the listeners with that little teaser, but on that, thank you everyone so much for listening. I really, really appreciate you being here. I hate sounding like a YouTuber, but please follow on Spotify and like and review and all those lovely things as well. Go do that. Yeah. Give me whatever rating you want. I don't care.
No,
Feedback's always good.
He's really good. He's really good. Get liking because it helps the algorithm. You won't say it, but I will. Help him.
Something like that. But I do hope you found this chat really resourceful, insightful, and hopefully a lovely listen. But with that being said, thank you and have a lovely rest of your day.
Oh, thank you.